Good day learners, this is Dr. Rasna Sehrawat from Amity Institute of Education, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. Welcome to Swayam Portal, Course Environmental Education, Week 11, Module 44, Analysis and Evaluation of Environmental Education Programs in Teacher Training Institutes of Developed and Developing Countries. After this module, you will be able to analyze and evaluate the various educational programs run under environmental consciousness in the teachers training institutes in developed countries and underdeveloped countries and the developing countries. You will be able to analyze, you will be able to interpret the various strategies that are being employed over there. To start with, appreciation of and concern for an environment is nothing new, as quoted by NEEAC 1996. Since the early writings of John Muir, Studies in Sierra 1950, The Mountains of California in 1894, Our National Parks 1901 and The Steep Trails 1919, Aldo Leopold, Game Management 1933 and A Sand Country Almanac 1949 and a Henry David Thoreau, Aulus Perseus Flaccus 1840, The Services 1840, The Landlord 1843 and The Poems of Nature 1895. Amongst others, concern over humankind's impact on the environment has been well discussed and documented in these. In 1962, Rachel Carson's release of Silent Spring, a seminal work documenting the effects of pesticides in the environment, brought about a new sense of urgency in how humankind interacted with their environment and paved the foundation for environmental literacy. As Daniel Einstein 1995 notes, a new educational movement was born after the publication of landmark book The Silent Spring in 1962. Silent Spring quickly became a catalyst for the environmental movement. From this movement, a different emphasis began to emerge. One is that development of awareness of human complicity in environment decline, and the other one on involvement of public values that stress the quality of the human experience and hence of the human environment. The World Conservation Union, founded in 1948 with a vision of a just world that values and conserves nature, seeks to influence, encourage and assess societies throughout the world to conserve the integrity and diversity of nature and to ensure that any use of natural resources is equitable and ecologically stable. Environmental education is an important tool in achieving these goals. In early 1970s, the emergence of environmental education movements had given a powerful boost by United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in Stockholm 1972, focusing the attention on environmental concerns. Earth Day was born in 1970. It was considered as a milestone as it led to the creation and promotion of many NGOs working towards the conservation of the environment. It also recommended that environmental education should be recognized and promoted in all the countries. Those who taught about the environment called for a new type of curriculum that included an examination on the values and attitudes people used to make decisions regarding the environment. The environmental educators began to work towards a common definition for environmental education. Dissinger's seminal paper on how to define environmental education, first published in 1983, sketches the fundamental debates over environmental education purpose and meanings. Along with his 1997 epilogue, Dissinger traces the evolution of the term and differentiates it from similar types of education such as outdoor education and conservation education. The field of environmental education has had difficulties defining itself and setting goals since its inception in 1960s. In the epilogue, Dissinger concludes that environmental education's multidisciplinary nature causes a fundamental tension among the practitioners, namely that the practitioners tend to approach environmental education from their own field rather than take an interdisciplinary approach. Another tension in environmental education is between purely educational objectives versus behavior changing objectives. Although many definitions of environmental education exist, including an EPA definition, differing opinions about the purpose of environmental education still persist. The Roots of Environmental Education, How the Past Supports the Future by McCrea traces the origins and evolution of environmental education in the United States from early thinkers in the 18th century to the modern era. Key events include the Belgrade Charter written by UNESCO in 1975 and the 1977 Tbilisi Declaration. The Tbilisi Declaration was the result of the 1977 Intergovernmental Conference on Environmental Education convened by United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization in cooperation with United Nations Environment Programme. The declaration is one of the formative documents that establish structure and principles for environmental education programs. The declaration advocates an interdisciplinary approach that develops an environmental ethics based on existing values and a holistic understanding of environmental issues. In addition, environmental education programs should be both inclusive of surrounding communities and oriented towards problem solving. The declaration also speaks to the training needs of environmental specialists, specifically that they should have the necessary knowledge and skills to be given a full sense of their responsibilities. The World Conservation Strategy produced by WWF, IUCN and UNEP in 1980 was the first report to turn sustainable into a buzzword and to highlight the poverty development environment nexus. The report was also the first to coin the term education for sustainable development. Ever since the 1987 Brundtland Report, WCED, World Commission on Environment and Development, Our Common Future, expressed international concern for tackling social, economic and environmental challenges in the issue of sustainability and sustainable development. These have become important issues for teachers and teacher educators. Among the plethora of definitions on sustainable development, the most widely accepted definition is by WCED. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition is in wider agreement with several other international initiatives, IUCN, the Tbilisi Declaration, the International Education Programme, the UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, the Earth Summit Agenda 21, Chapter 36, Millennium Development Goals, Education for All, Dakar Framework for Action, Decade of Action for Sustainable Development from 2005 to 2014 as a way of signaling that education and learning lie at the heart of approaches to sustainable development. The 2002 Johannesburg Summit Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, UNESCO, and the Ahmedabad Conference on Education for Sustainable Development in 2004. The Brundtland Report also emphasized the world's teachers have a crucial role to play in helping to bring about the extensive social changes needed for sustainable development. Agenda 21 was empathetic about the role of education in advancing the goals of sustainable development. Education is critical for promoting sustainable development and improving the capacity of the people to address environment and development issues. It is critical for achieving environmental and ethical awareness, values and attitudes, skills and behaviors consistent with sustainable development and for effective public participation in decision making as quoted by UNCED 1992 Chapter 36. What is explicit in this context is the vital role of teachers and teacher education institutions as a key mechanism for building the capacity of would-be teachers in the process of attaining a sustainable future. The period of 2005-2015 Decade Education for Sustainable Development of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization hinged it on the recognition of important role of education in the future realization of the sustainability of environmental resources and economic and social well-being. In the post-2015 agenda, the United Nations expanded and identified 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 targets to be pursued and achieved by the year 2030. The SDG Sustainable Development Goals agenda acknowledges the role of education in the socio-economic and political progress of all. Goal 4, Target 4.7 aims to ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including among others through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyle. Human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity and of cultural's contribution to sustainable development. Undoubtedly, the goal and the targets have implications for teacher education. In order for teacher education programs to be effective, the knowledge of sustainable development, theories of teaching and learning, and practical knowledge of teaching skills or experience should be integrated into training programs. Teacher education institutions should prepare teacher trainees to play a role in addressing the ecological and socio-economic concerns and democratic values of the society. Teacher trainees, both pre-service and in-service, need to be empowered, well-trained, professionally qualified, and supported with well-resourced, efficient, and effectively planned teacher education programs in order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 4. Education for sustainable development can be summarized as education about, education in, education for the environment. As Tilbury puts it, education about the environment is concerned with developing awareness, knowledge, and understanding about human-environment interactions, which has traditionally been in the realm of science and geography curricula. Education in the environment involves getting the students out into the field to experience nature and to develop greater awareness and concerns for the environment. Education for the environment strives to make environmental improvement the end goal by imbibing students with a sense of responsibility to take action to solve environmental problems. Environmental education can provide the individuals with new knowledge about environmental matters, improve their environmental awareness, and allow them to discover new teaching methods for their practice. Consequently, the courses on environmental issues should be introduced in teacher training curricula in order to improve environmental literacy and sustainability using cascade strategy. Environmental education is a must, and so is the evaluation of environmental education. Now, need for evaluation to illuminate successes and challenges. Evaluation is one of the most important activities environmental educators can engage in to justify programs to skeptics, thank funders for donations, and build support for continued operations. Evaluation should be used as an opportunity to make recommendations and suggestions for adaptive changes of the evaluations themselves in addition to the organization. And second, that these recommendations should aim to evaluate and improve the organization itself in addition to the program. Evaluators can use the opportunity of any single environmental education evaluation to suggest ways in which the organization, not just the program, can be transformed to better meet their goals of cultivating society-ready citizens and solving difficult problems. There are at least 4 good reasons to devote due attention to evaluation and analysis. It clarifies what pupils and adult participants learn from nature and environmental education activities. It creates opportunities to account to funders about performance and effectiveness. It provides information improving the quality of future educational activities and consumer satisfaction. It promotes professionalism in nature and environmental education. In order to conduct this evaluation, the answer to following research questions need to be explored. How successful is the environmental education program? How can the environmental education program be improved? And how can the proposed recommendations be used to increase the success of new initiative? Components of evaluation in consonance with goals for curriculum development in environmental education. Hungerford in 2007 outlined 4 goals for curriculum development in environmental education just after the 1977 Tbilisi Declaration. The first one is ecological foundation, then conceptual awareness, the third one investigation and evaluation, and the last one is environmental action skills. Superordinate goals: developing a knowledgeable and skilled citizenry who take action to balance quality of life with environmental issues. The goals of environmental education according to the Tbilisi Declaration are to develop an awareness of environmental and its interconnected issues, provide the opportunities to gain the knowledge and skill to protect the environment, and to initiate behavioral changes at all levels of society. Hungerford and Vogt in 1997 discussed research findings that challenge and underlying assumptions of the efficacy of environmental education. Teaching and raising awareness about environmental issues do not necessarily lead to behavioral changes. Synthesizing studies on environmental behavior, the author suggests that the 3 categories of variables contribute to behavior change. Entry-level variables such as environmental sensitivity, ownership variables including in-depth knowledge and personal investment, empowerment variables such as knowledge of environment, action strategies, and intention to act. Hungerford and Vogt discuss crucial elements of an environmental education curriculum to change behavior. Although the techniques for education for a change in behavior are known, the challenge to implementation is that the teaching techniques are significantly different than those that are currently used. In consonance with the set of guidelines provided by the Intergovernmental Conference on Environmental Education to help governments and non-governmental organizations develop environmental education programs, the curricula should be evaluated on the following facets of environmental education: social, cultural, economic, ethical, and developmental concerns. Focus on practical environmental issues linked with larger policy or regulatory efforts to institutionalize environmental protection. The North American Association for Environmental Education has also developed a set of guidelines to improve non-formal environmental education programs. NAAEE recommends that program development starts with a needs assessment, followed by an assessment of organizational capacity. Then program scope and the structure should be defined, as well as how the program will be delivered, by whom and with what materials. Finally, the program should be evaluated. Without a culture of assessment, impacts and effect are difficult or impossible to determine. As quoted by Fian in 2002, the authors recommend 12 principles of good practices. The first one is focus. Under this principle, the pedagogy should concentrate on building social and scientific capacity for conservation, growing popular support for conservation, and the measures that can improve people's quality of life, which would subsequently ease human pressure on the environment. The second one is promotion of sustainable development. Identify the importance of active engagement in conservation work. The third one is integration. Indicates that conservation education program should be one tool in a full toolbox, which includes capacity building, communication, advocacy, and environmental monitoring. The fourth one, pedagogy. Active participation was again stretched. Goals that pedagogies should strive to accomplish include the development of environmental knowledge and values, critical thinking and problem solving skills, and the ability to work cooperatively on conservation problems. The fifth one, the importance of partnerships with local stakeholders and their involvement in the design and implementation processes were again identified as being critical for the institutionalization and sustainability of conservation education. The sixth one, key decision makers are particularly necessary partners to have, as they have the power and influence to make the program sustainable. The seventh one, transforming systems, alludes to not simply changing people's behaviors and ways of doing things, but to empowering them to change the institutions and social constraints that are current barriers to conservation. The eighth one, leadership and support, entails local commitment as well as good coordination between all stakeholders involved. The ninth one, effective management, involves strategic planning and consistent monitoring and evaluation that go beyond the summative to the formative and then the participatory. The 10th one, lastly, the participatory planning and research fully integrates all stakeholders into the project management cycle. As suggested and recommended by Wilkie et al. 1987, while designing a training program for teachers to develop positive attitude towards conservation of environment, identify the needs of teachers and to include them in the planning process. Obtain support from all levels of the administration. Choose competent trainers. Ensure that there is enough time to complete the training. Ensure that there are enough materials and they will be available. Coordinate between the different levels of stakeholders. They stress the importance of discovering what local stakeholders believe their environmental education needs are and integrating them into the design process to create a sense of local ownership. The same process is also vital for the teachers, who must feel like they are a part of the design process and can make a meaningful contribution to the planning and implementation of the environmental education program. Environmental Education in Schools, Creating a Program That Works by Bross and Wood is a manual designed specifically for Peace Corps volunteers with an intent to create environmental education program. The manual identified 5 objectives of environmental education as awareness, knowledge, attitude, skill, and participation. In addition, experiential education is identified as critical to students' understanding and retention by them. 5 factors were identified by Bross and Wood in 1994 needed to ensure a program will work. First one, the cultural appropriateness and local ownership. The second one, curriculum guides and reference materials. The third one, teacher training, particularly involving the teachers in material development, training the teachers to be trainers, and evaluation. The fourth one is funding, and the fifth one is maintaining the program support. IUCN's Evaluating Environmental Education by Stocking is a detailed manual that can guide an organization in conducting a thorough evaluation of an environmental education program. It lays out 13 steps, including identifying the purpose and objectives of evaluation, where the data will come from, the methods of data collection, the research instruments, and who will be included in the evaluation. It then goes through the data collection and analysis, interpretation of results, formulation of conclusions, and report creation steps. The Guide for Environmental Education Program, Madagascar, was also evaluated according to the framework made up of 5 main components: conformity to objectives, compliance with standards, scope and sequence, appropriateness for learners, and the last one is appeal. Now, the evolution of environmental education from Indian perspective. The Honorable Supreme Court of India in 1991 made environmental education compulsory at all levels of education. Curriculum framework prepared by NCERT has been accepted by the court as the guideline for state education departments to develop the textbooks for schools from 2004-05 onwards. While efforts at integrating environmental concepts into curricula have been going on since over 15 years, the judicial interest in the issue has given it impetus. NGO networks, including Center for Environmental Education, in partnership with the Department of Education and academic institutions, carry out teacher training in environmental education. In-service and pre-service opportunities for incorporating environmental education are offered through environmental education courses and project works. However, rigid and overloaded curricula, time constraints, and a conventional approach to teaching still pose a challenge to the integration of environmental education in formal environment. Systemic changes and ongoing capacity building will be required to address this issue. Distance education may also be explored as an option for environmental development. The state's responsibility with regard to environmental protection has been laid down under Article 48A of our Constitution, which reads as follows: The state shall endeavour to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Environmental protection is a fundamental duty of every citizen of this country under Article 51AG of our Constitution, which reads, "It shall be the duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures." Article 21 of the Constitution is a fundamental right, which reads, "No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedures established by laws." The state's responsibility with regard to raising the levels of nutrition and the standard of living and to improve public health has been laid down under Article 47 of the Constitution, which reads, "The state shall regard the raising of the level of nutrition and the standards of living of its people and the improvement of public health as among its primary duties, and in particular, the state shall endeavour to bring about prohibition of the consumption except for medicinal purposes of intoxicating drinks and of drugs which are injurious to health." The 42nd Amendment to the Constitution was brought about in the year 1974, makes it the responsibility of the state government to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. The latter, under fundamental duties, makes it the fundamental duty of every citizen to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. The National Policy on Education 1986, renewed in 1992, states that there is a paramount need to create a consciousness of the environment. It must permeate all ages and all sections of society, beginning with the child. The National Curriculum Framework 2005 envisages that environmental education to be imparted in an infusion model in the upper primary and secondary stages of school education, with an aim to bring about sensitivity towards the environment. The policy documents had been emphasizing on the subject since 1968. The result is highly aware generation, but the action towards it was still lacking. Therefore, NCF 2005 focuses on bringing about a generation which is sensitive and ready to work for it. National Focus Group Position Paper on Habitat and Learning, which forms the basis of environmental education as discussed in NCF 2005, emphasizes that environmental education with its holistic approach will form the new paradigm and replace sectoral thinking by multidisciplinary thinking. Further, it states that the very nature of environmental education will help in building capacity for critical thinking and problem solving instead of rote memorization. The position paper also provides a flowchart and a roadmap for the implementation of environmental education. India has been striving hard to address problems of poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, population growth, and ecological disorganization, which are directly impinging on the country's sustainable development. As sustainable development calls for a dynamic equilibrium among the social, cultural, economic, and ecological factors, there is a growing realization that if sustainable development is to be realized, India has to address many problems associated with these factors as a matter of priority. Further, the government also realizes that many of the answers to these concerns lie in the mobilization of individuals, institutions, and resources to develop socially just and environmentally sustainable futures. This process will also involve changes in people's ideas, knowledges, and values in order to bring about such changes in actions, while recognizing that the link between ideas, knowledge, values, and actions does not necessarily follow a simple linear psychological model. Indeed, the gap between espoused values and values in actions is one of the central educational paradoxes facing environmental sustainable development. In India, the protection and conservation of the environment has always integrated social, economic, and ecological factors. This unified approach to protection of the environment is perhaps inherent in India's culture and religious ethos, which emphasize the interconnectedness between the natural environment and the human community. Human beings are not considered as a separate from the environment, but as a part of it. Each individual life form must therefore learn to enjoy its benefits by forming a part of system in close relation with other species. No one species has the right to encroach over the rights and privileges of other species, unlike many Western moral philosophies since the Enlightenment, which attach sole or greater value to humanity's moral values. India has integrated sustainable development and planning processes and has several programs directed towards this goal. Its initiative in addressing development and sustainability issue touch upon the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. Government of India's sensitivity and commitment to sustainable and inclusive growth is reflected in the major policies of various ministries and also specific initiatives and programs adopted through its 5-year plans so as to achieve sustainability and Millennium Development Goals. Environmental education in India has always been seen in the development context. Therefore, much of the aspects of environmental education can be seen as environmental and sustainable development. For instance, issues such as water, housing, health can be seen from a variety of perspectives including access, equity, distribution, and traditional use. Thus, the perspective of ESD needs to be built on the foundations of sector-specific development already laid out and then integrating it as part with to achieve wider development agendas. It is in this respect that India is progressively marked different from other countries. The Indian vision for DESD and ESD, environmental sustainable development, is hence based on the commitment towards sustainability rooted in the centuries-old traditions of living in equilibrium with nature and all its elements. Thank you.